What it do, astronauts? It's D Money, and I'm here to give you a new interview from What It Do. Earlier in the week, I told you that I would be talking with Matt Dunford, chairman of San Diego Comic Fest. Today, March 7th, is the kickoff to the event. The convention will be going all through this weekend. Matt is one of the most passionate people I have ever talked to when it comes to comic books and pop culture. You'll definitely hear in the interview that once you wind him up, he's just gonna keep on going. So much valuable information is to be heard. Now I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up and get into it. I've got to get my bag packed to get to this convention. Now, welcome to the show, Chairman of San Diego Comic Fest, Matt Dunford. What it do?
Oh, what it do? Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. I am so glad you are here to talk San Diego Comic Fest. I went last year. It blew my mind. You took over a portion of San Diego, and I cannot wait for it to happen again.
Okay, yeah, because we're going to do it even better this time. So this is going to be our 7th year of the show, and pretty much just like we strive to make things better and better with each experience. For the listeners out there, San Diego Comic Fest was started off in 2012, so now this is our 7th year. It was started by Mike Towery and Richard Alf, who were actually the original founders of San Diego Comic-Con. They started San Diego Comic-Con back in 1969. Mike was just a 15-year-old boy dealing comics, and they kind of just thought, like, hey, you think other people like comics out there? So they decided. He went to the local magazine store owner named Richard Alf, and he said, hey, you want to help us put together an event to try to get some comic nerds talking? And they said, yeah, sure. What happened is they reached out to Jack Kirby, and surprisingly, Jack Kirby, the king of comics, so for your readers out there, he created Captain America and the Hulk and the X-Men, and pretty much Marvel was the house that Jack built because Jack was drawing all the characters. And he agreed to be the guest at the first California Golden State Comic Book Convention, because San Diego wasn't a readily known city in 1969, so they had to use the allure of California and Golden State to bring people in. So during the first San Diego Comic-Con, it attracted about 200 people, and then the next one attracted about 400 people. And then Jack said to the kids when they started it, they said, look, it's already doubled in size. Next thing you know, this will be so big, it'll take over the entire town. It'll be a place where Hollywood comes to show off the movies they made last year and find the movies they're going to make next year. It's like, just you wait. This is going to be huge. But they just kind of laughed at Jack, but he was the Nostradamus of comic books, and he was right. And the thing is, for the people who were there in the first Comic-Cons of the 1970s, they never expected it to be as big as it is today with, 250,000 people. And so the guys who were there in the start of things, they still longed for days where you could go back and just be in the El Cortez Hotel in a small, intimate environment where you could have all these legendary comic creators just there hanging out with you. And they missed that. So during the 40th anniversary of San Diego Comic-Con in 2009, they all got together and they said, wouldn't it be, it's so good getting us all back together for a reunion. What if we were to make a convention that was just like the old days? And so the result was San Diego Comic Fest. And of course, it's not like I have anything against San Diego Comic-Con, but I know not everybody is so comfortable with the giant atmosphere of things, and it's intimidating for a lot of people. Some people may not know the tricks of the trade to have a good time there, and they may just end up spending a time in lines a lot or kind of being disappointed. Like, I've been going for 25 years, so I know how to tame this beast. But some people say, I spent all time getting in this line for the Hall H to try to watch the HBO panel or something. And it's like, well, that's not really good time management when you could be out doing other stuff. I mean, there's always a great time to be had at San Diego Comic-Con. But I think it's nice to have opportunities to dip your toes in the water before taking a plunge to a major convention experience like that.
San Diego Comic-Con has turned into something so big. I feel there's so many different fandoms there that if you want to find something specific, it's not going to be as great as if you go to something smaller where it really well focused on that niche thing, which is comic books.
Yeah, and so San Diego Comic-Con now entering its 50th year, it has grown to include more offerings in what they go for. I don't really necessarily deem that as selling out. I think it's just catering to the needs of more fandoms because there's something there for everyone. But definitely if you want that focus, the smaller, more specific conventions are the ones you have to aim for.
Now, where does your love of comic books come from?
Now, my love of comics started very much when I was learning to read in the early 90s. My original passion before comic books was pirates. I loved pirates. I pretty much watched Peter Pan 5 times a day, and my favorite toys were Lego pirates. And one day my parents got me this playset that actually had a Lego Pirate comic included in it. So Captain Redbeard and the Gold Medallion. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I asked my mom, oh, Mom, read this for me. Dad, read this for me. Mom, read this for me. Dad. And my parents got tired of having to read me this comic 15 times a day. So they literally sat me down and taught me to read just so I could read this comic. Then, of course, I resonated very well with that. So they took me to Toys R Us to try to get me some children's books to continue reading. And I saw the most beautiful thing in the world. It just caught my eye. It was a green holographic cover of a Spider-Man comic. I'd never seen Spider-Man before in my life. And I walked up to it, and it was 30 issues of Spider-Man to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Spider-Man, because the year was 1992. And he got that for me. And I read those Spider-Man issues till they fell apart, and that was my introduction to Spider-Man. I just was like, I was just plowing through it. I could not get enough Spider-Man. But things went into overdrive for me on November 19th, 1994, when I was exposed to the Spider-Man animated series for the first time. And I thought I was a Spider-Man fan before. Nope, you ain't seen nothing yet. When I saw that cartoon, it blew my mind. And I'm so happy now because this year at San Diego Comic Fest, I get to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Spider-Man animated series with series producer, story editor, and head writer John Semper. So we got a lot of great stuff in store for the Spider-Man fans.
That's very exciting, and I'm glad you told that story because this whole time getting to know you online, I'm just, where is his Spider-Man obsession coming from?
That's where it comes.
Where is it? Where's the pinpoint? And it all makes sense now, so thank you for sharing that story. How do you go from the Lego Pirate comics to being chairman of San Diego Comic Fest? Like, how does that fall into your lap?
Okay, so how did that fall into things? Pretty much like, I was a pretty comic-focused guy, and I'd always loved comics, but I didn't really have, a true career path in life. So it's about 10 years ago, I was going to UC Santa Barbara to study archaeology because I wanted to be the next Indiana Jones. Watchmen was being adapted into a film then. And so I went to Meltdown Comics where Len Wein, who was an editor on Watchmen, was giving a talk. And I, of course, knew Len Wein from his time. He's, helped co-create Wolverine and Swamp Thing back in the 70s. But as I listened to him, this was my first time actually realizing what a comic editor does. You always think of a comic editor as a glorified spell checker. The way that Len was talking about it, it's like being in the director's seat. And I thought, you know what? That sounds like the coolest job in the entire world. All you have to do is tell writers and artists how to make comics better. And it's like, this is so cool. It's like literally being the guy behind the scenes. And so I went up to him afterwards and said, how does one become a comic editor? He says, well, learn so much about comics that you could be the next great comic historian. I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I basically, Googled comic book historian, and you come up with one name. The first guy is Mark Evanier. I'm like, hey, isn't he the guy who runs all those animation panels? But he also did panels on comic history. And I started talking with Mark Evanier and saying, it's like, I want to be like you. I want to be the next great comic historian. He says, well, I wish you luck on your quest. And then the final day of Comic-Con that year, there was a panel, the Jack Kirby Tribute panel, where one of the founding fathers of Comic-Con, a guy named Roger Friedman, was there. And he talked about, oh, yes, I'm also a professor of physics at UC Santa Barbara. I'm like, hey, I go there. So I sought out this guy, Roger Friedman, and I would go to his office hours and I would talk with him about the early days of San Diego Comic-Con. It was just, I spent a year doing that, learning all these great Comic-Con history stories. A year later, I was going through my finals. It was just literally about to graduate. I hadn't slept in days. I was just overdosing on coffee and energy drinks when Roger emails me and he says, we have a student here who is graduating with a PhD in superheroology, talking about the theatrics of why people dress up as superheroes and save the day. And he turned to me, Mark Evanier, and cartoonist Scott Shaw. He's asked us, can you come up with some questions to come up for this PhD dissertation? So I dropped everything I was doing, and I came up with 10 questions. When Evanier and Scott Shaw got to it, they said, yeah, these are pretty spot on. And then Scott Shaw says, yeah, these are good, but who the hell is Matt Dunford? And Professor Friedman responded, he's Matt Dunford, the world's youngest comic book historian.
Well, you earned it.
I came back to San Diego after I graduated from UCSB, and I discovered a place called Little Fish Comic Book Studio, which is here in San Diego, that teaches comic education. I said, I don't know what you're doing here, but help me. I can help. And eventually I helped, the comic education process so much that they appointed me president of the board. Of course, in 2012, Comic Fest came along. I attended Comic Fest for the first 2 years as a fan, and, it's off to a, rough start. Like most conventions. You're taking your baby steps to get there. But during the third year, I volunteered my services and I helped them. And it was better the year three. And then during the fourth year, I said, all right, let's take this up a step further. And during year four, that's when Comic Fest finally became the convention it needed to be, where it was the focus on comic history, but still bringing in people who have a comic history past, but are still working on active projects. Because during the first 2 years, people called it geriatricon because it was kind of like a lot of old people. But like, no, you can bring in a younger crowd for things. You can get people jazzed on it. And then before the fifth year, we were celebrating the centennial of Jack Kirby. Mike Towery, the president of Fest, asked me if I would like to be appointed as the chairman. And I'm like, wait, say what? He said, you have been so helpful and so enthusiastic and have been so instrumental in uniting the community to this event that I would be honored to make you the chairman. And I said, I mean, if you want to put it up to a vote in the committee, and all 5 committee members voted in favor of me unanimously as chairman. I said, all right, let's step this up. So that year at Comic Fest, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the X-Men cartoon along with the Jack Kirby Centennial. And at that show, when we put things together, people were coming up to me and saying, Matt, there's too many good events going on all at once. Do I go to this X-Men panel, this Kirby panel, or this? It's like I said, too many good events going on all at once. Sounds like a good problem to have. And then we took things a step further last year when we celebrated the 200th anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. After we were done, Forbes called us America's best small convention.
It was so fun last year. You definitely did Frankenstein and Mary Shelley and her creation justice. It was definitely visible all throughout the event. It was fun. What can we expect from this year's show, and what do you want attendees to walk away with?
You can expect the best San Diego Comic Fest ever. So right now, I'm smoothing out programming and just putting all things into place like a puzzle, because you want to make sure that people are entertained and informed, because I will not allow programming if it's going to be boring, because there's nothing, you should not be wasting your time at a con. You should be having fun nonstop. So our theme this year is 50 years of the moon landing. Some people say, well, that's not comics. I'm like, actually, the moon landing had plenty to do to influence comics. So you look at comics in the 1950s and 1960s, everything was space age, everything was science fiction, everything was influenced by just getting America into orbit and onto the moon. I mean, even the first issue of Fantastic Four had them in a rocket ship launching into space. And of course, the moon landing wouldn't happen for another 8 years. Took a lot of trial and error, but the moon landing was that moment where science fiction became science fact. So we have a lot of great moon-themed programming. Some people coming in from NASA, from the Jet Propulsion Lab, from SpaceX. So they're going to be talking with some of our science fiction guests and talking about the science fiction meets the science fact of things. So that's always a fun thing to do. You're going to be the first to hear it. John Sepper and I actually want to do a panel together on the origins of the Spider-Verse. Now, for anyone who actually watched the Spider-Man animated series back in the 90s, if you watch the 2 final episodes, Spider Wars, you might notice that, a group of Spider-Men coming together to save the world from across different dimensions. And then you watch the Spider-Verse movie, it's like, doesn't that plot seem a little familiar? I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved Into the Spider-Verse. That movie was so much better than it had any right to be, but it's not a new concept. So we're going to take a time to talk about the original concept, the final episodes of Spider-Man, the Spider Wars, and how they influence the Spider-Verse. We're bringing in comic writer James Robinson, who is a living legend among things. He's going to be celebrating 25 years of Starman, which is arguably the best comic of the 90s. And then I'm also happy to mix things up and bring in editorial cartoonists, political cartoonists, just folks from all across the board. One of my personal favorites, Shannon Wheeler, creator of Too Much Coffee Man, is coming by. Nowadays, he's a New Yorker cartoonist and a graphic novelist, but once upon a time, he was firing bullets into his own Xeroxed copies of comics just to have bullet shot variant cover gimmick. And it's amazing to see, you have gone from being so ratchet when making your comics to being at the most highbrow publications in America. That's a wonderful story. We've also got some more animation legends coming on board. We're bringing in the 3 tuners, Tony Benedict, Jerry Eisenberg, and WhatItDo. Tony Benedict, who used to write for the Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound, Top Cat, and all those Hanna-Barbera shows back in the day. And then Jerry Eisenberg, who was a producer on Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound, Johnny Quest, Space Ghost, a lot of those things too. And then WhatItDo, who's a frequent flyer around San Diego Comic Fest. You might know WhatItDo as the guy who animated the spaghetti scene in Lady and the Tramp, and he also created Hong Kong Phooey. These guys are getting up there in the years, so I highly recommend chatting with them. And other animation legends we're bringing back in Mr. Floyd Norman, who spent about a decade working with Walt Disney as the first black animator. I think his first job at Disney was in 1956 when he designed the dress for Sleeping Beauty. Yeah, he's still working at Disney doing movies and storyboards and stuff. He has been working there since 1956. He spent a decade working with Walt Disney.
There is so much to keep an eye out for this year. You're just topping yourself, getting bigger and better. You are not kidding. Lots of histories, lots of stories to be told. I cannot wait to get into it. Where do you see San Diego Comic Fest going in the coming years?
I always present the challenge for myself because I always make sure the show is better and better every year. So I always make it a tough act to follow. But, we don't get anywhere by doing the same thing twice. So that's why we always mix up the guest list. That's why we always mix up the theme each year. So that allows us to play around with a different toolbox and give different talks and different insights on things. And just keep the fans invigorated, because I attend a lot of Comic Cons and I can go to programs and just be like, I've kind of seen this before. I don't really need to see this again. I don't want fans saying that at our show. I want them to be constantly entertained and inspired every single time. One person having a bad time for me is too much. But I do see, a little bit of growth with the numbers. I definitely want to make sure that people are having a fun time. I want to grow, but I don't want to grow too big, because remember, I'm still committed towards the relaxed, intimate setting of things. And when you grow too big, all of a sudden you're not so intimate as before. Well, we are at a different venue this time. We'll be at the 4 Point Sheraton on Arrow Drive, which is a more flat laid out spot. So things are easier to get to. We'll have a gigantic atrium for Artist Alley, and we have more than 60 creators talking out and about for things, and several rooms, and even a full theater where we can incorporate visual lectures and panels and just keep things going. And also a very open grassy area for the cosplayers and people who want to do photo shoots and whatnot, because we're an inclusive event for everyone. And we also are bringing in several local institutions like the Air and Space Museum, Scripps Aquarium, talking about different events that they can do along the way, because like I said, we are community focused, community first and foremost.
And such a variety and diversity as well. Now, if you want to get tickets, where can everybody find those?
Go check us out at www.sdcomicfest.org. It's $50 just for the whole weekend, all 4 days. And we've been with that price point for 7 years, and we're sticking with it. We also offer active military discounts, student discounts, and senior discounts, and kids 12 and under are free.
Perfect. And then where can everybody find you and the show on social media?
You can find me at just Matt Dunford, MattDunford. Find me on Facebook. On Twitter, it's just at Matt Dunford. Instagram, at Matt Dunford. Pretty much everything Matt Dunford is me. And then you can also just find, look us up on Facebook at San Diego Comic Fest, FEST. And on Instagram and Twitter at SD Comic Fest. Looking forward to seeing all of you guys there, because we're going to have a phenomenal time.
Oh, it sounds like it. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for talking with me about SD Comic Fest.
Thank you so much for having me on. I look forward to seeing you and all your big fans there.
So will I be seeing you at SD Comic Fest this weekend? Be sure to snatch up your tickets now. If you would like more of the show, head on over to WhatItDoPodcast.com. There you'll find all of our social media, past episodes, and so much more. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, now including YouTube. What It Do, done it again.